When she turned 18, her stepfather sold her to a disabled alpha king, all to save her stepsister. The manor she called home had walls heavy with shadows and whispers, corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly, and windows that framed nothing but gray skies. Her stepfather, Lord Malric, ruled the household with iron precision and a cold heart. Her stepsister, Leora, delicate and fair, was the sun in the house, and Alara was nothing more than the shadow she left behind. On the morning of her 18th birthday, Alara woke to the smell of burning candles and old wood. Her stepfather had summoned her to the great hall. The air was tense, charged with the sort of dread she had long learned to recognize. She dressed in her plain gown, her fingers trembling not from excitement, but from a creeping sense of foreboding. "Rise, Alara," Malric's voice boomed as she entered. He was seated at the head of the long oak table, Leora by his side, her hands folded in anxious innocence. "Today, your life changes." Alara's heart sank. She had expected something cruel, yes, but nothing like this. "You are no longer a child," Malric continued, his gaze fixed on her like a hawk. "The king awaits you, King Kale. He is different from other men, powerful, feared, and bound by his own trials. He requires your presence at his court." Alara's mind whirled. She had heard the rumors of Kale. Once a mighty king, he was now crippled, his body broken in ways no common eye could ignore, yet his will remained unshaken. Stories told of his temper, his wrath, and the shadows that clung to him like loyal hounds. You cannot," Alara stammered. "I cannot go to him. I've done nothing wrong." Malric's face darkened. "It is not your choice, girl. Leora, she will die if you refuse. You understand the stakes. You have always been the obedient one. This is your moment to prove it." The words struck Alara like a blade. Her stepfather had always favored Leora's survival over her own well-being. And yet, the price he demanded was her life, or at least, the life she had known. Her stepsister's wide eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "Alara, please," Leora whispered. "I cannot survive this without you." Alara's chest tightened. Her love for Leora had always been quiet, hidden beneath layers of resentment and sorrow, and now love demanded a cruel sacrifice. By evening she was packed and ready. The carriage awaited, drawn by black horses that snorted steam into the cold night. As they departed, the manor receded behind her, swallowed by mist and memory. The journey to Kale's castle was long and treacherous. Mountains loomed like jagged teeth, and the roads twisted through forests that seemed alive with unseen eyes. Alara could feel the weight of every mile pressing upon her chest, a mixture of fear, anger, and curiosity. When the castle came into view, it was more magnificent and terrifying than she had imagined. Perched atop cliffs that plunged into a roaring sea, its spires pierced the clouds. Stone gargoyles glared from ledges, and a faint, bluish glow pulsed from some of the windows. A chill ran down her spine. The gates opened slowly, groaning as if in protest. Guards in dark armor escorted her into a vast hall, lit by torchlight that flickered against walls adorned with tapestries depicting battles long past. At the center of the hall, seated upon a throne carved from obsidian, was King Kale. He looked smaller than the stories had made him, not in presence but in form. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle, the throne itself seeming to bear the burden of his weight. Yet his eyes, a storm gray that seemed to see through the walls, through the guards and finally into her, carried the gravity of storms and command. "Enter," Kale said, his voice both smooth and cutting like steel wrapped in silk. Alara stepped forward, head bowed, but her spine was rigid. She refused to show fear even as her pulse raced. "Your Majesty," she said, voice steady though her hands shook. Kale studied her. There was silence, a kind of waiting as though he were measuring not just her words but her very soul. "You are the girl my counselors have sent me," he said finally, with an almost imperceptible edge of curiosity. "Yes, Your Majesty. You are young. 18 if my sources are correct." Alara inclined her head. Yes. And yet, Kale continued, leaning forward slightly, I sense strength in you, though it is tempered with hesitation. Alara's breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her this way, seeing past her fear, past the obedience she wore like a chain. And yet, the weight of his gaze was not comforting. It was demanding, almost unbearable in its intensity. The bargain, Kale said, standing now with a slow, deliberate effort. Though he moved stiffly, there was a strange grace to his form. Your father's stepfather, he corrected, has traded you for the life of another. That is a heavy debt to carry. Are you prepared to bear it? Alara swallowed hard. The answer was simple, yet complicated. I will try, your majesty. Kale's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in calculation. Try, girl. I expect more than attempts in my halls. Obedience is a given. Strength, loyalty, cunning, these are earned. She bowed her head once more. She had expected cruelty, but the intensity of Kale's presence, his power, his history, his pain made her feel like a candle flickering against a hurricane. Good, he said finally. You may take your quarters. Dinner will be served at dusk. Alara was led to a chamber that was at once luxurious and cold. Velvet drapes hung like shadows, and a fire burned low in the hearth, casting flickering light across the walls. She set her small pack on the floor and sank onto the edge of the bed. Her mind replayed the day's events. Her stepfather's cruel bargain, Leora's pleading eyes, Kale's commanding presence. A storm of emotions raged inside her, fear, anger, sorrow, and an unexpected pull towards something she could not name. That evening she attended dinner in the grand hall. The room was filled with lords, ladies, and advisors, all speaking in hushed tones. But it was Kale's eyes that drew her attention, resting on her even as he conversed with others. She noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he raised a goblet, the stiffness in his movement. There was vulnerability there, hidden beneath authority, a quiet echo of the rumors that had reached her village. Dinner passed in tense silence. Kale spoke little to her directly, yet every glance, every movement felt like a test, a silent probing of her courage, her wit, her resolve. Finally, as the guests departed, he called her forward. You are stronger than most, girl, but this castle will not forgive weakness. Remember that. There are forces here older than kings, and they will test you in ways you cannot yet imagine. Alara swallowed. I understand, your majesty. Kale's gaze softened just for a moment, revealing a flicker of something human beneath the kingly mask. Then it hardened again. Good, rest now. Tomorrow begins your true education. As she returned to her chamber, the wind howled against the walls, and the castle seemed alive with whispers. Shadows moved in corners where no light reached, and she felt a strange pull, as if the castle itself recognized her presence. She shivered, but not from the cold. Alara did not sleep that night. She stared out the window at the cliffs and the roaring sea below, thinking of her stepsister, her stepfather's betrayal, and the man who now held her fate in his hands. Somewhere deep in the shadows, a soft glow pulsed faintly, a ring on Kale's finger, she realized, that seemed to hum with power. She could not explain why, but her heart reacted, a mixture of fear and strange fascination. The first day of her 18th year had ended, but the weight of her new life pressed upon her like chains of iron. She was no longer a girl who could walk freely in her father's manor. She was bound, sold, and delivered into a king's hands, hands that could protect her or destroy her. And in the darkness, Alara realized one truth she could not escape. She was not in the castle by accident. Something about her presence, her blood, her will, mattered far more than she knew. As the night deepened, Kale stood on his balcony, looking down at the sea. A shadow fell across his face, and his voice whispered to no one, yet it carried across the hall. You are not here by accident, girl. The shadows themselves have guided you. Alara, alone in her chamber, felt the weight of his words settle into her bones. She did not understand yet, but she knew her life would never be the same. The castle had claimed her. The king had claimed her. and the shadows were only beginning to stir. The dawn arrived with a gray sky, heavy and low, pressing against the towering walls of the castle. Ilara awoke to the chill of her chamber, the fire long burned down to glowing embers. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the window panes like the whispers of restless spirits. Her body ached from a night of sleepless thoughts, and yet a strange energy stirred within her, an awareness that she had entered a place where every shadow held a secret and every silence carried a warning. She dressed in the simple gown Kale had provided and stepped into the hall. Servants moved quickly around her, carrying trays of food and arranging candles, yet their eyes never met hers. She sensed an unspoken tension in them, a fear of the king and perhaps of the strange aura that clung to her presence. Kale was already in the hall when she arrived, standing near the great windows, his back straight even as his leg bore the evidence of years of pain. The king's eyes turned toward her, and for a moment Ilara felt as if the air itself had thickened. "You are awake," Kale said, voice calm but commanding. "Good, today we begin your lessons." Ilara's stomach tightened. Lessons. She had expected education in court manners or royal etiquette, but there was something in his tone that suggested far more, something that would test her very being. He led her through long corridors, some lit by torches, others shadowed and silent. Portraits of long-dead kings stared down at them, their eyes seeming to follow Ilara's every step. The walls were adorned with tapestries depicting battles, magic, and strange creatures, some of which seemed to move if one stared too long. The air smelled faintly of iron and herbs, an intoxicating blend of danger and power. They arrived at a chamber that Kale called the study. The room was vast, filled with shelves of ancient tomes, scrolls, and objects she could not identify. Candles flickered, casting long shadows across the floor. Kale gestured to a seat and she sat, feeling suddenly very small in the presence of such knowledge and history. "Your first lesson," Kale began, "is to understand the power you carry, whether you recognize it or not." Ilara frowned. "Power? I am no one, your majesty. I am just," she hesitated. "Just a girl." Kale's eyes narrowed. "Do not mistake humility for weakness. You are here because you matter. The shadows themselves whispered your arrival. You are bound to this castle, to me, by forces older than men and perhaps older than kingdoms." The words chilled her, yet they carried a strange comfort. She had always felt invisible in her own home, but here Kale saw her. Not just her presence, but something deeper, a potential she had never imagined. He handed her a small, leather-bound book. "This contains knowledge of the old spells, the curses, and the oaths that bind this kingdom. Study it. Learn what it says. Understanding is survival." Ilara opened the book carefully. The pages were filled with writing in a language that seemed to twist and shimmer beneath her gaze. Symbols danced lightly in the candlelight. Her fingers trembled as she traced the lines, feeling a spark of something within her respond to the words. She didn't yet understand it, but it felt alive. "Do not fear what you cannot yet grasp," Kale said, observing her closely. "The first test is patience. The second, courage, and the third," he paused, his gaze piercing hers, "is loyalty. All will come in time." Days passed, each one bringing new challenges. Kale tested her endurance both physically and mentally. He demanded obedience, precision, and unwavering attention. Yet at times, he showed glimpses of a different side, moments when his stern facade softened, revealing loneliness and pain. Ilara began to see that Kale's disability was not his weakness, but a part of the story that had shaped him. A great battle years ago had left him broken, yet unbowed. His body may have been confined, but his mind and will were free and terrifyingly strong. In those moments, Ilara felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination. Kale was a storm she could not resist, and she knew it. But she also understood that trust here was fragile, earned only through trials and observation. One evening, as she walked the hallways, she overheard whispers from the servants. Words like curse and danger, floated to her ears. She paused, leaning against the cold stone wall. The castle was alive with secrets, some of which were bound to the king himself. Later in the study, Kale spoke again, breaking her thoughts. "You are not here simply to obey, Alara. You are here to understand the threads that bind this kingdom and its people. To know them is to survive them." Alara looked up from her book, her curiosity piqued. "The threads? What do you mean, Your Majesty?" Kale's eyes glimmered in the candlelight. "Magic is older than men, and the oaths of our blood carry consequences beyond imagination. You will see that soon enough." One night, as a storm raged outside, Alara was awakened by a faint glow emanating from the castle's corridors. Drawn by curiosity, she followed it, her bare feet quiet on the cold stone. The light led her to a small chamber she had never noticed before. Inside, a pedestal held a ring, its metal dark yet pulsing with a faint, bluish glow. Alara felt an unexplainable pull toward it. She reached out, hesitated, and then withdrew. Her heartbeat echoed in her ears. She realized with a shiver that the ring was the same one Kale had worn the first day she arrived. Before she could ponder further, a shadow fell across the room. Kale stood in the doorway, his eyes stormy yet unreadable. "You should not touch that," he said softly, yet there was an edge in his tone that made her step back. I didn't mean to," Alara whispered. "You must learn restraint," Kale said. "This ring is not just a jewel. It carries power that is bound to bloodlines and oaths. To wear it without understanding is to risk yourself and others." Alara nodded, swallowing the fear that had risen in her throat. "I understand, Your Majesty." Kale studied her for a long moment and then turned away. "Good, you are learning. But remember, understanding does not come without risk." The next day, Kale tested her endurance further. He brought her to the training yard, a vast courtyard surrounded by high stone walls. Despite his disability, he demonstrated techniques with a staff, moving with precision and skill that belied his condition. He instructed her to follow, to move, to focus. Alara struggled at first, untrained and unsteady. But with Kale's guidance, she began to find rhythm and strength. His voice, calm yet insistent, pushed her beyond fear, beyond doubt. By the end of the day, she was exhausted, her muscles burning, yet she felt a strange pride. For the first time in her life, she realized she could survive here. She could endure, and perhaps one day she could even thrive. Kale watched silently, his gaze unreadable. "You are stronger than you believe," he said finally. "And you will need that strength, for the shadows are waking, and they will not wait for you to be ready." That night, she returned to her chamber, the storm still raging outside. She thought of Leora, trapped in the manor, and of the cruel bargain that had brought her here. She felt anger toward her stepfather, yet also a strange gratitude, for though the path was harsh, it had led her to this castle, to Kale, to a destiny she did not yet understand. She opened her book once more, tracing the symbols and words, feeling the faint stirrings of something powerful within her. The castle seemed to hum in response, as if approving or perhaps warning her. A sudden knock at the door startled her. Kale's voice followed. "Alara, come to the balcony. There is something you must see." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped into the night air with him. The wind tore at her hair and gown, but the view took her breath away. The cliffs plunged into a storm-tossed sea, waves crashing like thunder against the rocks below. The sky was alive with lightning, illuminating the castle in flashes of silver and blue. Kale's hand rested lightly on the balcony railing, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "This kingdom has been cursed for generations," he said, voice low. "And now you are part of the story that may either save it or break it further." Alara shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of his words. She felt the pull of destiny, of magic, of something greater than herself. And in that moment, she knew that life within these walls would demand everything from her, her courage, her heart, and perhaps even her soul. As lightning illuminated Kale's face, she saw not just a king, but a man haunted by his past, bound by pain, and searching for something he had lost long ago. And she knew, with a mixture of fear and longing, that their fates were intertwined in ways neither of them yet fully understood. The morning fog clung to the cliffs outside the castle, hiding the sea below in a thick blanket of gray. Alara woke early, as she had done each day since arriving at Kale's fortress, but this morning felt different. A weight hung in the air, heavier than the usual chill. She felt it deep in her bones, a pull she could not explain. Her book lay open beside her, the symbols on the pages shimmering faintly in the dim light. She traced her fingers over them, feeling the magic stir within her, quiet yet insistent. The castle seemed to respond, its shadows shifting as if alive. She remembered Kale's words, "You are bound to this kingdom to me by forces older than men." Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. "Ilara," Kale's voice called low and steady, "come with me." She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed him through the hallways. The castle was quieter than usual, as if it too was holding its breath. Kale led her to the chamber that held the ring she had seen before. The bluish glow pulsed faintly, and when she stepped closer, she felt the strange pull again. "Do you feel it?" Kale asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Alara nodded. "Yes, it feels alive." Kale's gaze softened, though his body remained tense. "That ring is part of the curse. It is bound to bloodlines and oaths, and it reacts to what you carry inside yourself, your courage, your heart, and your will. Many have tried to wield it, but few have lasted." She swallowed. "And I can last." Kale studied her, the storm in his gray eyes deepening. "That remains to be seen, but you are not ordinary, Alara. You carry something old, something strong. Perhaps it is what this kingdom needs to survive." Alara's chest tightened. She had never thought of herself as special. She had always been invisible, overlooked, used, and discarded. And yet here, the king of a cursed kingdom saw something in her, something powerful. The day passed in lessons and trials. Kale taught her the language of the old spells, the meaning behind the symbols, and the stories of the curses that had shaped the kingdom. Alara learned quickly, driven by both fear and determination. Each success, each small spark of understanding, felt like a victory, not just for survival, but for herself. At dusk, Kale led her to the courtyard again. The sky burned orange and purple as the sun set behind jagged cliffs. The wind tugged at their hair and gowns, sharp and biting. "You are learning," Kale said, "but the true test is not strength or knowledge, it is heart, courage, and loyalty even when the cost seems unbearable." Alara looked at him. "Loyalty to you?" Kale shook his head. "Not to me, not yet. Loyalty to the kingdom, to what is right, to what must be preserved. And perhaps loyalty to yourself." Alara's heart raced. His words were heavy with meaning, and she felt both fear and a strange exhilaration. That night she could not sleep. She returned to the chamber with the ring. The glow was brighter now, almost urgent. Tentatively, she reached out again, brushing her fingers over the cold metal. A sudden shiver ran through her body, and she saw visions flash in her mind. A battlefield, a broken king, a girl standing alone against shadows that seemed alive. Alara stumbled back, gasping. The visions faded, but the feeling remained, an echo of destiny, of choices she would have to make, of power she barely understood. Kale's voice startled her. "You have seen it." She turned. He was closer than she had expected, his presence filling the room. "I warned you," he said, though there was no anger, only something heavy and sad. I didn't mean to," Alara whispered. "You cannot escape what you carry," Kale said. "The curse binds you as much as it binds me, and now you have seen a fragment of it." Alara swallowed. "What does it want from me?" Kale's gray eyes softened. "It wants truth, courage, strength. It wants someone who can survive its tests and perhaps one day undo it." The next day brought a new challenge. Kale led her to the castle's deepest halls, where the stone was old and damp, and the torches flickered as though afraid of the dark. Here, the magic of the castle felt heavier, pressing against her senses. This is the Hall of Ancestors, Kale explained. Many kings and queens before me tried to fight the curse. Some failed, some survived only in shadow. You must learn from them if you are to succeed. Ilara's eyes roamed over the walls, covered in portraits of men and women with eyes that seemed to follow her. She felt their presence, their expectations, their failures. The air felt charged, thick with the weight of history. Kale handed her a small dagger. You will carve a mark in the stone for each lesson you remember. Let the castle see that you are learning, that you endure. Ilara did as he instructed, her hands trembling. Each mark felt like a declaration of existence, a proof that she would not vanish into shadows as she had in her old life. Kale watched silently, and when she finished, he nodded. You are growing stronger, he said. But strength alone is not enough. The curse tests more than power. It tests heart, spirit, and will. Days turned into weeks, and Ilara grew more confident in her abilities. Yet the tension between her and Kale remained. At times his presence was a storm, commanding, intimidating, impossible to resist. At other times it was a quiet vulnerability, a loneliness she could not explain but felt compelled to understand. One evening during a lesson on the old magic, Ilara accidentally activated a small spell. The candles flickered and a whisper echoed through the chamber. She is the one. Ilara froze. Kale's eyes were wide, the storm in them deeper than ever. Do you understand what you have done? He asked softly. I think so, Ilara said, her voice shaking. It was not intentional. Kale took a slow breath. Intentions matter less than outcomes here. You have awoken something older than this castle, older than me. And now it watches you. Ilara's heart raced. She felt both fear and a strange thrill. The castle was alive, the curse stirring, and she was at the center of it. Later that night, Kale summoned her to the balcony. The sea below raged against the cliffs, lightning illuminating the storm clouds. Kale leaned on the railing, his gray eyes fixed on the horizon. Ilara, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper, the curse is tied to your bloodline. Your stepfather knew this, though he never spoke it. That is why he sent you here, and that is why you must learn faster than anyone else could. Ilara swallowed. My bloodline I don't understand. You will, Kale said. In time, the truth will reveal itself. But for now, you must trust yourself and trust that I will guide you, even when the path is dark. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the storm outside and the shadows within the castle seemed to fade. There was only them, standing on the balcony, caught between fear and the unspoken pull that drew them together. Ilara felt something she had never felt before, a mixture of longing, respect, and a desire to rise to the challenge before her. She realized that her feelings for Kale were complicated, but they were also real, and they gave her strength rather than fear. Kale's gaze softened, though the storm in his eyes never fully vanished. Rest now, he said. Tomorrow, your trials will continue. The curse will test you further, and the shadows will not wait for you to be ready. Remember, courage and heart are your strongest weapons. Ilara nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest. She returned to her chamber, the glow of the ring faintly pulsing in the corner. She traced its surface with her fingers, feeling the hum of magic, the stir of destiny. The castle was alive, the curse awakening, and she was no longer a mere pawn. She was a participant, a force, and perhaps, one day, a savior. The morning sun struggled to pierce the gray clouds that clung to the cliffs around the castle. Ilara awoke with a mixture of anticipation and fear. Today would not be like any day before. The castle hummed with energy, the shadows moving with purpose. She could feel it in her bones. The curse was stirring, and her trials were reaching their peak. Kale was already in the courtyard, leaning on his staff, the morning wind tugging at his dark cloak. His leg bore the usual stiffness, but his posture was proud, commanding. When he saw her, his storm-gray eyes softened, but there was an unmistakable tension beneath the calm. Today, Kale said, you will face the heart of the curse. The shadows will challenge you. The magic will test you, and I will be here, but I cannot protect you from everything." Alara nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of the ring that pulsed faintly in her pocket. She felt its warmth, its power, and the strange connection that had drawn her to it. Her courage had grown in the castle's shadowed halls, yet fear still lingered. She took a deep breath. "I am ready, Your Majesty." Kale's gaze lingered on her, a mix of pride and concern. "Good, then let us begin." The journey led them to the castle's deepest chamber, a hall unlike any other. The stone walls were etched with ancient runes, glowing faintly in the dim torchlight. Shadows twisted along the floors and walls, moving independently of the light. A strange chill filled the air, pressing against their skin and making each breath feel heavier. "This is the heart of shadows," Kale explained. "Here the curse is strongest. The magic that binds the kingdom and me resides here. To survive, you must face it, not with strength alone, but with heart." Alara stepped forward cautiously, her eyes scanning the room. The shadows moved closer, curling and twisting like living smoke. Whispers filled the chamber, faint at first, then growing louder, echoing words of fear, doubt, and failure. "You will need to trust yourself," Kale said, his hand brushing against hers briefly in encouragement. "And trust that I am beside you." Alara felt a strange warmth at his touch, a reminder that she was not alone, that the bond between them had grown into something unspoken but real. The shadows surged, forming shapes, figures that seemed human yet distorted, reflecting fears and memories. One shadow took the form of her stepfather, sneering and cruel. Another became her younger self, trembling and small. Alara froze, her mind threatening to be overwhelmed by the visions, but Kale's voice cut through the chaos. "Face them, Alara. Fear has no power unless you give it life. You are stronger than the shadows believe." She clenched her fists and drew on every lesson Kale had taught her, every moment of endurance and courage. She remembered the castle, the ring, the whispers, and the pull that had brought her here. Slowly, she stepped forward, reaching out with her heart as much as her mind. The shadows hissed and recoiled as her presence touched them, light pushing against darkness. The shape of her stepfather wavered, the sneer fading into confusion. The figure of her younger self seemed to nod, as if approving her courage. "You are doing well," Kale said, his voice steady but urgent. "Do not falter now." The ring pulsed strongly in her pocket. She realized then that it was not just a relic of power, but a key. Drawing it from her pocket, she held it in her hand. The glow intensified, sending ripples of light through the chamber. The shadows shrieked and recoiled, twisting violently. They formed one final figure, a massive winged shadow that seemed to encompass all fear and pain. Alara's heart pounded, but she refused to retreat. She stepped forward and spoke aloud, her voice clear, strong, and unwavering. "I am not afraid. I will face what must be faced. I will not let the curse control me or this kingdom." The shadow hesitated, then slowly began to dissolve, the darkness retreating to the corners of the chamber. The runes on the walls glowed brighter, harmonizing with the ring's pulse. Light filled the room, warm and steady, pushing back the shadows entirely. Kale watched silently, awe and relief in his eyes. "You have done it," he said softly. "You have faced the curse and survived." Alara exhaled, her body trembling from exhaustion. She had faced the darkness, yet something had shifted deep within her. She felt stronger, braver, and more alive than ever before. After the chamber quieted, Kale guided her out to the balcony. The storm that had long threatened the cliffs had cleared, revealing the vast kingdom below, bathed in golden light. The sea shimmered and the castle's shadows seemed lighter, almost at peace. "You did more than survive," Kale said. "You changed it. The curse, it will never be the same again." Alara's heart swelled, and for the first time, she allowed herself to look at Kale not just as a king or teacher, but as a man who had endured as much as she had. Their eyes met and something unspoken passed between them, a shared understanding of pain, growth, and trust. Kale's voice softened. "You have my respect, Alara, my gratitude, And something more, though we have not named it yet. Alara felt warmth in her chest. I feel it too, she admitted. A bond that is stronger than fear, stronger than the shadows. Kale smiled faintly, a rare, genuine smile that lit his features. Then let us not waste it. There is still work to do, restoring the kingdom, protecting the people, and ensuring the curse never rises again. In the days that followed, Alara and Kale worked together to heal the wounds of the kingdom. They inspected villages, spoke to lords and ladies, and helped undo remnants of the dark magic that had plagued the land. Alara's courage and intelligence impressed the advisors, while Kale's wisdom guided every decision. Through it all, their bond deepened. They shared quiet moments in the study, watching the flickering candlelight, speaking of dreams, fears, and the past. The castle, once oppressive and cold, seemed to respond to their unity, the shadows no longer threatening but protective. One evening, as the sun set over the cliffs, Kale took Alara to the highest tower. They stood side by side, watching the horizon, the wind tugging at their cloaks. "You have changed everything," Kale said. "Not just the kingdom, but me." Alara turned to him, her heart full. "And you have changed me. I am no longer the girl who arrived in these halls in fear. I am stronger. I am free because you trusted me to be." Kale reached out, taking her hand gently. The warmth of his touch carried a promise of respect, of partnership, of a future that was theirs to shape. "Then we are both free," he said, eyes meeting hers. "Free to live, to protect, and perhaps to find what we have both been missing all these years." Alara's heart leapt and she squeezed his hand. Yes, together. The final challenge came soon after. A messenger arrived from her old home, carrying news of Leora and the stepfather. Her stepfather had grown weak, powerless to protect Leora from the dangers he had tried to avoid through Alara's sacrifice. But Leora had survived, thanks to the courage of her sister and the influence of Kale's protection. Alara felt a surge of relief, tempered by sorrow. She had left a part of herself behind in that old life, but she had also gained something far greater, a sense of purpose, strength, and belonging. Kale watched her reaction closely. "You did what was needed. You saved her and yourself. That is courage, Alara." Alara smiled faintly. "And you saved me too, Your Majesty, from fear, from doubt, from a life without meaning." Kale's smile deepened and he squeezed her hand once more. "Then we are even," he said softly, the weight of their shared journey reflected in his eyes. The kingdom began to heal under their joint guidance. Villages flourished, magic was balanced, and the shadows receded. The castle, once filled with whispers of despair, now echoed with the quiet laughter and voices of those who had endured. Alara walked its halls with confidence, no longer a shadow but a light that others could follow. Kale remained by her side, not as a master commanding a subject, but as a partner, equal in strength, courage, and heart. Together they faced every challenge, every shadow, every echo of the past. And in their unity, the kingdom found hope. As the sun set over the cliffs, golden and warm, Alara stood beside Kale on the balcony. The sea below sparkled, the wind was gentle, and the castle's shadows lay at peace. "You have come far," Kale said. "And so have I," Alara nodded. "Yes, and we will go further together." Their hands met, a simple gesture that carried everything they had endured, everything they had learned, and everything they would face in the future. The curse had been challenged, the kingdom preserved, and two hearts, once burdened by fear and pain, now found strength and love in each other. The shadows of the past had not disappeared entirely, but they no longer controlled them. And as Alara and Kale stood together, looking toward the horizon, they knew that whatever challenges awaited, they would face them as one.